I have a problem. My radiator is leaking. So what do? Do I get a new one or do I get this one repaired? You can see that the leak is coming out of here where the top tank meets the radiator core. If I look online, you can get a new one for £230. I could get a second-hand one, but either one of those would have to be modified for this hose here, which is not standard. This I had brazed in to allow the return from the throttle body to go into the top tank. So even if I get a new one, I have to get that brazed in, or I take the radiator out and I send it off and I get it repaired and I get someone to reflow the solder into this. Or option 3, I try and repair it myself, which I've never done before. So that's exactly what we're going to try and do. And before we can repair it, we need to remove it. With a container slid underneath the car, I can then remove the radiator cap. I can then remove the clamp on the bottom hose using a 7mm socket. I then pull the hose off and you guessed it, the coolant misses the container. I can then remove the small hose that comes from the throttle body, which for some reason just never had a clamp on it. With that tucked up out the way, I can then remove the clamp on the top hose that comes from the thermostat housing. I then carefully remove the hose, making sure I don't damage the coolant fan temperature sensor, which is housed inside the hose. I then pull the sensor through the bracket in the side of the radiator and tuck it out the way. I can then lean down and push the coolant fan wiring plug out of the hole in the cross member, and then I unplug the fan. I can then remove the 130mm nut at the bottom which holds the radiator into place. With that nut removed, I can pull the radiator upwards out of the rubber mounted side brackets. I tilt it forward to remove any of the remaining coolant, and then I can lift it clear from the car. Next thing I need to do is remove the coolant fan. Now, the fan is held on with these push-through ties, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know how they come off. I think they might be a one use only. I don't think I can pull them off. I think I might have to cut them and then get some new ones, or come up with a different design of holding the fan on. Okay, I've tried pulling them, pushing them, twisting them. They don't come off. Okay, well, the best way is to cut them. You've got to try and get the pliers between the rubber and the screw. Hold them flat and just cut them. Well, I don't know where that one went. Remove this final hose. Or not. Now it's dry, you can see the crack where the coolant was leaking between the top tank and the core. Okay, so the plan is to use some plumbing flux and some plumbing solder and to heat this area up and then to flow the solder into this gap, sealing it off. And obviously before I do that, I need to remove all the paint and make this as clean as I possibly can. Okay, we're slowly getting there. You can still see there's a little bit of dirt still in here that I need to try and scrape out. It's really hard to get into this crevice here, but you can see where the solder's missing, clearly why it's leaking. I've done this side as well, because this side, although it wasn't leaking, you can see it's a little bit low there. So if we just reflow all the way around the top, try and neaten that up a little bit, but there's still paint in it, it's still a bit contaminated. I really want to clean that seal a little bit more than that, get it as clean as I possibly can, so it gives it the best chance to stick. Okay, I don't think I'm going to get this actually any cleaner than what I've already got it. There is still a slight amount of paint in there, tiny bit of paint and dirt in there, which I just cannot get out. So I'm going to fill it with flux. I'm going to heat it up, let that flow. I'll then flux it again. And then I'll put some solder on it. See the dirt coming out of it where it's definitely not clean enough. If you repair radiators for a living, or you're a plumber, you're probably screaming at me right now that that is not clean enough. Although the dirt is coming to the top, so hopefully I'll be able to wipe it off. Okay, well that seemed to flow in okay. I found it was easier to heat the bottom here and let it flow rather than heating the top. Did this side as well, just where that indent was. I guess the next step really is to block this and this off, fill it with water, put a pressure tester on there, just pump some pressure in and see if it springs a leak. Okay, let me show you what I've done. So I've joined the inlet and the outlet together with a single piece of hose. I've put a small hose with a bolt on it on this top pipe, and then let me turn you around. So you can see I've filled it with water. I squeeze the hose, you can probably hear that. So it's completely full. Okay, so I've got the pressure tester on. I'm going to put some pressure in it and hopefully not get squirted in the face. You see as I increase the pressure, this hose is coming out. I'm up at 12 psi. You feel that's rock solid. And it is dry. I've had the pressure tester on now for 10 minutes. It's not leaking, so let's get some paint on it and get it back in the car. Okay, before I do that, let me show you my plan for the fan, my fan plan. So before you saw earlier that the fan was held on with these ties that push through the fins on the radiator. And even though I fitted these, I don't really like them because it's damaged the, clearly it's damaged the fins. I have tried to straighten them out slightly. You can see, you can see where it's slightly dented there. This one's a little bit worse. I've straightened them out as best I can. So these push through the fins and the fan sits flush against the radiator. But if I don't put them on tight enough and the fan moves too much, it could potentially move side to side and then damage these tubes that the coolant flows through. So I've come up with a better idea. If you look on the side, there are these holes, these little tabs. I made this bar, made two of these. One on there, try and do this one-handed, one on there. So you can see that sits on there. I've made another one that will fit on the bottom like that. So then the fan can mount to them, although I'm not going to put it this side. I'm actually going to put it this side. That'll go on. Because there's two ways that you can have a cooling fan. You can have one that is the engine side and it pulls air through the radiator, or you can have one that sits on the front of the car and it pushes cold air through the radiator. Now my fan does have a reversible blade, but I've fit it to the front of the car and let it push the cold air through. And the reason I do that is because it just looked, in my opinion, it looked neater. This was just nice and clean between here and the engine. There was no fan there, there was no wiring there. The wiring could come off and tuck into the cross member. And personally, I just think it looked better. You may disagree and think the fan should be fitted this side, but I'm gonna carry on doing what I did before and I'm gonna fit it this side. Okay, so I flushed all the remaining coolant out of the engine so it doesn't mix with the new stuff. I've flushed through the radiator and I've also washed and blown through the fins. So let's get it back to black and get it back in the car. Now it's painted, let's build it back up. Put the brackets on. Okay, with the brackets in place, I can now mount the fan to the brackets. And how I'm going to do that, I'm actually going to use cable ties. You might be thinking, why is this idiot using cable ties to hold the fan onto the bracket? Well, because unfortunately the bracket doesn't quite line up with the holes. So if I drill a hole there, it doesn't line up there. If I drill a hole there, it doesn't line up there. But if I cable tie it on, it's not going to fall off. It's going to be fine. And also, what's the difference between this cable tie and that cable tie? It's still a tie that went through the fins. So that's what I'm going to do. This really would have been a lot easier if I had the radiator laying down. Now just to refit this hose. Okay, the fan's on and that's proper secure, that's not going anywhere. You can see it no longer touching the fins. So now we can finally get it back in the car. And refitting is really just reversal of removal. I slide the radiator down into the side brackets and then drop it down into the mounting hole at the bottom. I can then re-tighten up the 13mm nut. I can then re-plug in the fan and push the wiring back into the cross member. I can then get the coolant fan temperature sensor and push it through the bracket in the side of the radiator. I then insert it into the hose and push the hose on, and then I can do up the clamp. I can then put the hose from the throttle body on, not forgetting this time to put a clamp on it. With that clamp tight, I can then put on the bottom hose and tighten up the clamp there. With all the hoses tight, I can then top up the system with a 50-50 mix of G12 antifreeze and water. Okay, let's start it and get it up to temperature. Okay, it's running good at the moment. Let's just run it till the thermostat opens and see if the fan cuts in. With a thermal imaging camera, you can see the engine and the radiator starting to heat up. Top hose is starting to get warm. You can see it starting to flow. If you watch the fan closely, you'll see it start up and bring the temperature of the radiator down. See the fan set up to run on after the engine switched off, just to keep it cool. I can adjust the fan down here with this little switch here. This allows me to adjust the temperature that the fan comes on. There is also a default setting where I can just flick it and I can just turn it on so it runs constantly. and there it's off. It's been running now for about 40 minutes. We've got no leaks. We're good. Okay, that's another job sorted. A few more, and then hopefully we'll be driving her in the summer. Hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next one.